been driving the Nova and having a blast. And with every tank that I spit out that tailpipe, I'm finding more and more that I want to make one improvement, and that is fuel mileage. I know 454 and fuel mileage does not belong in the same sentence. I know, but I do want to be able to drive a little bit longer than 100 miles before sitting at a gas station pumping up my car. I mean, my car is a cruiser, and occasionally I do step on it and hear that 454 roar, but I do want to extend my driving pleasures a little bit further. So, just to give you an idea of what's been going on, the first tank that came out the tailpipe after driving around yielded me 6.5 miles per gallon. That was insane. I didn't think it was going to be that low. So I did a little tweaking, raised the timing, and went through my second tank full, and that yielded me 8.2 miles per gallon. Definitely an improvement. So a little bit more tweaking and I got it to 8.8 miles per gallon. That led me to my limitations, and so I needed to step it up a notch to see if I can squeeze out just a little bit more gas mileage. And that's what this video is about. Me putting in a wideband setup to get a little bit more performance and gas mileage out of my 454 V8 engine. Let's go check it out. If you watched my exhaust system installation, you notice that the only welding I pretty much did was where the collector adapter goes onto my exhaust system, and of course the tailpipes. That's it. The rest was attached with band clamps, and that was in part to ensure that I can rip the system apart anytime I wish. And as you can see, I pretty much ripped the parts that I needed to be able to install my bungs. Now I ended up making a mark on where I wanted the bungs first while the system was installed. Then I pulled them out and I drilled out 7/8 inch holes, and that will permit my lip to go right into the hole, and then all I gotta do is weld it. You can see it just slips right in. Okay, so I got my car nice and high and I went to install the pipes. Let me show you what they look like now. Okay, so here we are under the car, and you can see my bung placement. So there they are, and they're at the 2 o'clock and 10 o'clock positions. That is said to be the best positions so that no condensation will form on the sensor, as that usually happens inside these pipes, and condensation would of course ruin the sensor over time. So that's where I placed them. So now, where I'm going to route the sensors so that they get into the car for the controllers. Well, after thinking long and hard, I decided that I wanted to route the sensors above the tranny and in the shifter mount. So let's see if I can get a view. I've already drilled the hole, but let's show you what it's going to look like here. Let's see. Yeah, you can see the hole. There's the hole right above the transmission. So each sensor is going to go to its corresponding bank number 2 and bank number 1, and it's going to be routed from on top of the tranny. So now let's show you what it looks like inside the car. So here's an old wideband oxygen sensor I had laying around, and I measured from the largest point on this sensor from here to there, and that measured roughly about 1 inch. So I'm going to be installing 2 sensors through that hole, so I decided to go with 1.25 inches, because when I put one sensor in to route the other one in, I got to get past the wire. So I kind of calculated 1/4 inch, even though this is roughly about 1/8 inch. I gave myself a little play, so 1/4 inch, so that I'm able to get at least the second sensor past the wiring. So that's why I chose 1.25 inches. Now, I only had a 3/4 inch bit. That's the largest bit I got out of all the drill bits I have. So that's where my favorite tool comes in, the Dremel. And now I get to show you the special bit that I absolutely love in detail. Now you can see here, this bit is kind of weird looking, but this sucker can cut through metal, plastic, rubber, or anything very rapidly when this guy spins. So that's what I use to drill my 3/4 inch hole to 1 1/4 inch hole. You can see there. So now all I got to do is put my grommet in after I place my 2 sensors, and that pretty much completes the bottom half of the installation with the sensors going into the pipe. Now the top half, which is in here, requires me to route the controllers. The wideband setup I went with was the Innovate Motorsports LC1. So you can see here, there's 2 of everything on this table. 2 LC1 controllers, 2 wideband O2 sensors, 2 calibration units, and 2 LEDs. Now, I went with the LC1 because I have a lot of experience with the LC1. This one right here was the one I had in my previous project, a 98 Eagle Talon. Now, that car, I played around with a lot of different fuels, and I ended up with ethanol. Now, because the car was not made for ethanol, I needed to always monitor the engine, otherwise I would blow up my engine from a lean condition. I'm not going to go into why it would be a lean condition with ethanol, but what I will go into is this actually helped me tune my car so that the ethanol that was going through the injectors and into the engine and out the tailpipe gave me the most horsepower and at the same time safety for a daily driver application. So I have years of experience with this LC1, so it only makes sense for me to get another LC1 to complete my dual wideband setup for this 454 V8 engine. Now, normally when you get 2 setups, you need 2 gauges to be able to monitor what's going on. Now you can always hook this up to a laptop and you can monitor what's going on through there, and then you don't need a gauge. But I didn't want to be driving around with a laptop. I wanted a gauge, and I want to always see what the engine is doing. So I had to get 2 gauges to monitor it. But that was the case until I found a company that makes a dual display wideband O2 sensor gauge. This is the company right here, VEI Systems. And the gauge is just a standard gauge, but with 2 displays, one above the other. So that enabled me to be able to see what both sides of the engine is doing at the same time, all the time, without hooking it up to a laptop. Now, you can see that the gauge is mounted in the ashtray. If you recognize what this is the ashtray from the Nova. Now, though I want to be able to see it all the time, I do want to hide it. And so the ashtray was the perfect spot, in my opinion, to be able to mount this and hide it whenever I want it. Now, I didn't film how I made this because there was a lot of planning involved to get this to look and work out the way it is now. But I will explain it a little bit. Basically, you need to do 2 things. First, you need to cut off the back end of the ashtray and make sure that when you make the cut, it has to be parallel to the face of the gauge, because as you can see, the ashtray does have an angle to it. After you get that across, to get the gauge in there, you need to cut off the cigarette holder, which is pretty much like that. After you cut that off, well, you're going to get a big gaping hole. Now, in my case, I didn't want that hole because when I put the gauge in, you can see it. So, I had this lying around. This is a Sony battery case for 2 AA batteries, and I decided to cut it in half and use it to cover up that hole because it was the exact size I needed for me to cover up that hole. It makes it look nice because it transitions into where the gauge is. Then I sanded it all down, gave it a nice couple coats of truck bed coating, and there it is. that bracket that's holding the gauge is welded on to this ashtray. So that way I can bolt the gauge on, and if I ever need to take out the gauge, just pretty much unbolt it and pull the gauge out. So that's pretty much the setup right there. So I got my setup all done as far as the LEDs, the gauge, and the calibration buttons. So let's start with the calibration. Basically, this console for the shifter is going to be like that. And the buttons, as you can see, they're going to be totally hidden because it's going to pretty much be under the dashboard. And I set it up so that I have the buttons corresponding to the oxygen center is going to be controlling. So this will be bank 1, driver side. This will be bank 2, passenger side. That's in case I want to calibrate the sensors individually. Usually I'll just calibrate both of them, so I could just easily just press both buttons and I will be able to see the calibration on the gauge. So here's the gauge setup. Now you get to see it installed as intended. So we got the gauge, the ashtray in its place where it's supposed to be. The lighter is going to stay there, so I do want that to work, you know, for power, if I want to power up something. So that's going to be working as intended. And I got my LEDs for the LC1 units right above it. So again, it's going to be bank 1 for the left side LED and bank 2 for the right side LED. So that's going to be pretty straightforward. For the wiring, the unit itself, this ashtray unit had this, and this was pretty much a clip to hold only one wire. But because I'm adding all these wires, I had an extra clip, and so I decided to use it. So I got my white and yellow wires for the wideband, and then for the gauge and the LED, I got my positive and negatives. So that's pretty much set up. And then the last wire, the orange wire that the car came with, that goes right there to power up the lighter. And so for the dimming, you can see, remember, there was a dimming wire, but I don't have it as part of the wiring because I decided I don't want to use the dimming. And the reason for that is because the gauge, when I'm looking at it, I'm going to have this open. And when I don't want to see it anymore, all I got to do is close it. And the gauge is totally hidden away. So that was the idea behind this whole thing about putting the gauge in the ashtray. So there you go. So now I got to install the rest of the unit. So we'll have to see that in the next video. So hope you enjoyed. Thank you very much for watching.